run. To the workers' blood shall run. Taken untold millions. Taken untold millions. We can break their haughty power. For the union makes us strong. Taken untold millions.
Hello and welcome to Bread Theory. I'm your host, Zach, and tonight we're going to be talking about a case study where people actually defunded the police in a meaningful way. They took a service that the police used to provide. In this case, it was helping people when they were critically injured, and they saw that they were doing terrible at it. There was a huge death rate if you were going to be helped by the police because they didn't have the skills to know what they were doing. And out of that need, the Black community in Pittsburgh got together and worked with a professor to teach a bunch of what ended up becoming the first EMTs, things like CPR, things like other life-saving techniques like, putting on a tourniquet, that sort of thing. And they managed to create a service that was far and away much better than the police, and ended up taking that responsibility away from them, creating what later became the modern emergency services. So this is a real historical case. This actually happened, and this shows what can happen when a community comes together and says, "Well, hello, police. You're not doing things very well in this regard. We're going to go ahead and take over for you and do it better." So yeah, I'm excited to bring this to you tonight. We're going to be listening to an episode of 99% Invisible, which I will link in the comments presently. Give you a link to that right now. This is the story of Freedom House. And one second, I'm going to bring on my guest, Dan Platt, and we will be discussing it together. And if you've been watching this channel for a while, you should be familiar with Dan Platt and his work. He does the Three Lefts Show podcast, a really excellent podcast. Talks all kinds of political stuff, but rather than gab on about him, I'll just bring him on right now. And let's...
Hey!
Let me see if I can pull it. Oh, I have myself maximized. That's why. Not too bad. How you doing?
Where's my entrance music?
I was just playing it earlier. Did you hear it?
Oh. No, I didn't. Well, I was hearing Solidarity, but...
Yeah. I mean, I feel that's fitting enough entrance music for the kind of work that you do.
Yeah. My usual intro music is the theme of Jakuzare from Kill la Kill.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you're aware. It's anime, but
I am not familiar with that.
It's a march,
okay.
But it's also bombastic. Anyway, if you may have noticed, I am now in the back bedroom, and I've set up post stuff behind me, so it's not a full decked out. Where's all my tchotchkes like a usual gamer streamer, but
I'm sure eventually you'll get there.
Yeah, I'll move the bookshelf back, and then that'll be behind, and then I can have stuff on the bookshelf, maybe.
Yeah. At least you get some cool posters up and stuff. It looks like you're starting to add your own flair to it.
Oh yeah, you collect stuff when you do stuff.
Absolutely.
That's I wanted to point out that I don't know when, and maybe it won't happen. It really depends on other people, but I may be shifting my show from being general leftist strategy, which is kind of what I do, but also I cover ecological stuff. I've shared kind of what I do with greenwashing stories and stuff, but I wanted to refocus on my locality. I think again and again when I talk to other people on the online left that aren't MLs themselves, but even MLs are like, oh, we need to do local organizing.
Absolutely.
And, like a RPG party, you need the different buff, like the people buff the stats of the local activists, the local organizers. and you
I
need
guess
the bard to spread the word.
absolutely
There needs to be
keep
local
the
media
morale up. Yeah,
and keep the morale up. You need a local media to boost what they're doing and to talk to them, and so they can talk to everyone else. Because otherwise, they get stuck in their own bubbles, or scenes or what have you, and it doesn't get to the masses. Mass media. There's the
right.
mass and mass media.
For sure.
Otherwise, it's more ground that you see to the right, or
Absolutely.
liberals, because it's a three-way fight for us.
Right.
So you got
Yeah.
to keep that in mind. So, it's an interesting kind of point of view of like, if you're going to be a media personality online, it's like you got to be national if you Twitch audience or whatever. But with
Right.
my community radio station and even a podcast can be locally focused and just
Absolutely.
covering local stories. My one of my fellow producers, Cynthia, she does a show called Focus on Albany, and she was a Democratic Party committee person for I don't know how long. She didn't say, but she's very old now. She's like in her 70s,
Sure.
but over time, she just interviews everybody, and so she's gotten quite a good following just because she interviews. It's an interview show, and she just interviews hundreds and hundreds of people locally, whether they be office holders, activists, myself a few times, and that's what got me into like, well, I would like to do this more often, not just on her show because she's just interviewing me about the Green Party, but like there's so much more.
Absolutely.
So anyway, speaking of podcasts, 99% Invisible, a design podcast actually
One of my
that
favorites.
I haven't listened to in a long time. Ever
Yeah,
since
me either.
there was a few reasons why I stopped kind of being a podcast listener. Mostly, it was I started making my own,
Sure. Yeah.
and I wanted to resist the temptation of comparing myself to whatever I was listening to.
Makes
So
sense.
if I'm listening to Seriously Wrong and looking at where they are and what I'm doing, it's like it would just be depressing. I mean, it's existential almost. And again, if I listen to them now, I'd be like, look at what they're doing. And it's also kind of the reason why I'm like, look, we're not doing the exact same thing, but as far as content wise, like I'm sometimes a month ahead of them in what they're covering, but
Oh,
we
really?
are covering very similar things. So just not in the same style. They are Canadian after all.
Well, yeah.
And but otherwise, they got what I do covered for the most part, leftist strategy and whatever. And I think 4 years ago, I was like, they're not really doing what I would want to see. But I think more and more there's other people out there, including yourself, doing what I wanted to see 4 years ago, and who are open-minded to third-party politics, but maybe if they're not doing them, but even open to it. And yeah, so the next stage, I think for me, is to follow through with the original intent of like, I need to be the local left-wing Limbaugh, where people go for the communist opinion, because there's no other public figure who's leftist in my city. There really is no such person.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, when there's Occupy, there were spokespeople, but even then, there was, of course, the effort to make sure nobody was the face of Occupy.
Right. Yeah. They
There
were
were
very intentionally
even
decentralized.
But even when there was a media group and you had someone who was like, okay, the media will be interviewing this set of people, or the media group will like, okay, okay, today you're actually going to interview this random person instead of the usual person. So yeah, so that was part of the intentionality of that. But
Sure.
but again, otherwise organizations have like their chairperson and maybe they're interviewed, but they're not media personalities. They're
Right.
not like people you tune into because they're not making the media, right? The media has to come to them. And there's too little of that in my area, as probably everyone else is aware of. Local media has been killed by the Copyright Digital Millennium Act or whatever else.
Oh, the Sinclair Group. For
Well,
that
the Sinclair,
matter.
yeah, of course, and you're not going to get even a liberal show on the local Clear channel.
That's right.
So on, or even the
Yeah.
urban music channel with the rap music.
Hmm.
That's maybe you'll get like something like what was it, Charlemagne the God, who has good instincts, like, oh, they'll talk to Bernie or endorse a Bernie crat or something,
Right, right, right.
but it doesn't go
Uh,
beyond just that.
well, and he too is pretty nationally focused, not so much locally. So you're looking to be kind of the talk show personality on the left for the Albany region. That's the space you're moving into then?
Yeah, but
That's really cool.
it's all Albany.
All Albany. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Do you have a name for your new project yet? Or have you been spitballing ideas or anything?
Well, considering the site, the website address and all that,
Mhm.
I'm not really, and the logo designs I have, I'm not
Sure.
really interested in changing it from the three lefts to something
Okay.
else.
I mean, that
I'm
definitely
I'm
is
pretty
catchy.
sure that eventually it will not matter.
Hmm.
People care about what the content is, not what's called.
Right.
Um, I mean, I could also call it Focus on Albany, but that's taken.
Ah,
Or like what how to leftist Albany.
yeah.
Nothing would pop
Right, right, right.
in my at least nothing yet. But
That's really exciting though. And when I used to follow a lot more podcasts too, sometimes I would check out more of those localized shows, and they would have a lot of stuff that was definitely applicable to a national audience, even if they were specifically focusing on,
oh, of
their
course,
local area. So that's really cool. I think there's a lot of potential there for, you
yeah.
know, really doing some cool stuff.
Because otherwise, we have the Hearst owned newspaper that everyone has a rough opinion on, but they're like the best we've got.
Yeah.
There's really nothing audio wise. There's some local blogs, and they will report on things, but it's very inconsistent. Not even a weekly thing. It'll be like certain events will be covered.
Hmm.
But yeah, really inconsistent. And of course, because it's volunteer based, and so am
Right.
I.
Of
But
course.
since I've proven that I can consistently do something for 3 years, I can do it for another 3 years.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, now it's been almost 4 years now, but again, it'll be another
Wow.
4 years. Is what I'm thinking about, and then I'll maybe when I have a local audience of 100,
Hmm.
then I'm like, okay, now I will run for council
There you
because I
go.
will have 5 of those audience members will probably help me
Yeah. Yeah.
because that's
That's
all
the.
you need, or 5 people join a local Greens group to do eco-socialist
Hmm.
projects or just political agitation, just to lobby even because
For sure.
our my local all the other radical groups we're not interested in lobbying government for good reason, I guess. But
Yeah.
how else does everyone is you don't really solve anyone's problems
Sure.
without the public resources that the city has or
Sure.
the institutions that are set up.
I agree.
It's
And
yeah.
I mean, if you really think about it, even if you don't think you're going to make the kind of change you want to make holding those reins of power, if you're just letting any old person hold them, then they're likely going to be, actively damaging
Yeah,
the local area. So,
you have to do two jobs:
right,
resisting the people in power and trying to build something new.
right, 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 right.
So if you have someone who's an ally or some progressive who's just do little as possible kind of thing, that's neutral,
Hmm.
then you can focus on the corporations or something. But
Right, right, right.
in
So,
some
so at
areas
least,
it's one the same. So
right.
so what got you, so you listened to 99% Invisible and you wanted to, in this particular episode from a year ago caught your attention?
I think this is probably even longer ago than that. Let's see when this
Well, I
first.
checked. It was last summer.
Oh, it came out last summer. Oh
Hmm.
yeah, I must have been listening to it last summer. There's a number of those episodes from 99 PI that just kind of stick in my brain, and I'm like, if I ever need a topic to cover something, I can just kind of pull it up out of
It's
here.
been a long time since I listened to them, but I know there's some episodes that I couldn't say I recall them, but like they did make an impression of like that
Yeah,
got me thinking about something differently.
absolutely.
Or it was totally something I didn't know about. And when I worked at a test distribution where I basically have 8 hours
Hmm.
and nobody worth talking to. Podcasts were essential, and I could learn quite a lot. I even listened to Nerdist because
Yep.
I was that starved for
That's a
like
fun one, though.
for leftist. It was fun for a bit, but eventually everything gets tiring.
For sure.
And I think a mix of not having a job like that anymore. You know, I moved to part-time work, so I wasn't in endless hours, and they were public-facing jobs, so I couldn't really have anything in my ear, unless it was music in one ear, literally. But it had to be something that I could turn on and off.
Mhm.
And so I stopped listening to podcasts. The other thing was technical. I think it was taking too much room up on my hard drive, and I was having a real hard time making sure it didn't like fill up, and I had to keep moving things I wanted to keep to other externals. And now I think I finally got my last reinstall of Windows seems to have the option. I can now delete the old Windows updates, so I should be able to keep. So maybe I'll actually go back to downloading podcasts, but I'll stop watching Hassan for sure. Because he's 2 hours a day.
Yeah.
When I'm gaming.
He puts out a lot of content, that's for sure. Yeah. Yeah, with podcasts, I pretty much just have to keep them on my phone, and then I just only load one episode at a time, and then stream that. Otherwise, it fills up way too much.
Did you want to answer non-August question? Ian August?
Oh, okay. So let's completely talk about something that's not to do with tonight's topic.
I'm only asking if you want to. We can ignore him.
I mean, not really.
Yeah.
I don't have a strong opinion about the China-Taiwan issue. From what I know of Taiwan, they're basically the last capitalist holdouts from Mao's revolution.
Yeah, the Civil War.
So they're hyper-capitalist. I guess you could call it city-state even. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for them. I guess that's where I stand.
Imagine, to put it in American, imagine the the last Confederate holdouts. They took, say, a few thousand troops, maybe even 10,000, what was left over, and they fled to Cuba,
right?
And they set up their own government there, and they took over local authorities. It's like the equivalent of that, and we've been blockading Cuba for the last 80 years because of that, and instead of the actual good reason of doing so. Something like that.
So yeah, that's my quick opinion. But tonight we're talking about defunding the police. So if you have any questions about that, or anyone else in the chat, definitely throw those out there. This is definitely an educational space, and we're always happy to help people understand what's going on. But I guess without further ado, let's get into the episode here. And of course, we'll be pausing to give our commentary as usual.
This is 99% Invisible. I'm Roman Mars. Back in the 1960s and 70s in the city of Pittsburgh, there was a nickname for guys like John Moon, the Unemployables.
Which simply meant that no matter where you went for a job, nobody would hire you.
Moon grew up in Pittsburgh's largely black and economically depressed Hill District. In better times, the Hill had its own Negro
to the right, these people don't exist.
And jazz clubs that hosted Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong. But by the time Moon was graduating high school in the late 1960s, there was no escaping the neighborhood's unemployable stigma.
The reputation was there that I don't want to go to the Hill because you may get beat up. You have drug addicts and alcoholics, and that same label was placed on myself, and I understood that. But just because that was your thought doesn't necessarily mean that I had to live up to it.
So Moon was glad to land a well-paying job right out of school at the local steel mill, only to discover that the hours weren't as reliable as he had hoped. Next, he was an orderly at Pittsburgh's Presbyterian University Hospital, which provided steady employment, but not much else.
All I was doing was making beds and taking people back and forth to the operating room and lifting and stuff like that. Mechanical things where you didn't have to think.
For a while, Moon tried his best to find meaning in the work.
But there was a part of me that said there has to be something more that I can do.
Then one night, halfway through the graveyard shift, Moon watched as two men burst through the doors of the hospital. They were working desperately to save a dying patient, and as they rushed by, Moon stood pressed against the wall and wondered,
Who are these people? What are they doing? How did they get to be able to do that?
maybe today he wouldn't bat an eye at this scene, but in 1970, nothing about it made sense. The two men weren't doctors, and they weren't nurses, and their strange white uniforms weren't hospital issue.
But these guys came in with a certain type of confidence that was just shocking to me from the very point that they came into the room. And they had an emblem on their breasts that just piqued my interest.
The emblem was the two-snaked caduceus, the traditional sign of medicine and healing. But just below the familiar symbol was a word John Moon had never seen before: paramedic.
Moon wasn't familiar with the term paramedic because back then, no one was.
That's reporter Kevin Hazard.
Moon was witnessing the birth of a new profession, one that would go on to change the face of emergency medicine.
But to Moon, perhaps the most striking thing of all was that these first ever paramedics looked like him.
I'm standing here looking at these two guys, and I'm saying to
Really
myself,
burying the
"My
lead
God,
there. Why was
these
he
are black
shocked?
guys."
You know,
Never before.
I think that's why he was shocked. The medical
Yeah,
professionals, they were black,
Yep.
or they were black medics. That's a tease.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay,
But yeah.
black sheriff.
Before had Moon seen young African-American men performing that kind of work.
These were two guys that had afros and beards. And the staff on the floor gave them a level of respect that amazed me. And there's something I never really mentioned to anyone is I actually snuck off of the floor and I actually followed them out to the vehicle because I wanted to see what prompted them to show such proudness and boldness. Once I looked at that vehicle pull off, it was almost like, there goes my job. There goes my career. That's what I want to do.
Moon vowed right then, halfway through his long night shift, to become a paramedic. Whatever that was.
And in Pittsburgh, in 1970, the only place to do that was an organization called Freedom House Ambulance Service.
So I went and applied to get a job with them. And the rest is history.
But that history about how a group of young black men from Pittsburgh became the world's first paramedics is still largely unknown.
I'm a former paramedic myself. I did this job for 10 years. And you'd think the profession's origin story would be a big deal. But the truth is, most of the EMTs I've talked to have never heard of the Freedom House paramedics or understand what we owe them.
Today, it's easy to take what paramedics do for granted. Call 911 and they'll arrive with cardiac monitors, airway equipment, and an array of pharmaceuticals to treat anything from heart attacks to gunshots to premature births.
But for a long time, emergency medical service, or what today is called EMS, didn't provide anything resembling that.
In the early days of
And just something to keep in mind through this whole thing is that this is in 1970, meaning that for the
Not
entirety
that
of
long ago.
not that long ago, it is basically let's see.
It's the beginning of postmodern life. This is not a modern thing, right? It's postmodern almost.
Yeah,
To have
absolutely.
EMTs, to have it's a subdivision of a profession, right?
Mhm.
That there's specialization. This is very much a modernist or post-pomo type of thing. And yeah,
It's just crazy to think that before that point, no matter who you were, if you had a grievous injury, it was going to be a cop that shows up and takes you to the hospital, if anybody at all,
or a fire department,
or a
which
fire department.
But the thing is, our fire department are also EMTs. So
Yeah. So now that
at least in
Yeah.
Albany, that's like they do task.
Right. But back then that was not the case. The EMT was a completely new and separate thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, just something to keep in mind as we hear the unfolding of the way this went.
Of what we would view as EMS. It really wasn't the equivalent of what we see today. They would do whatever it was they knew to do, but, were they doing the right thing? Who knows?
That's Richard Clinchy. He's the president of the EMS Museum and a trained paramedic.
Clinchy says that when he started in emergency care in the late 50s, emergency services didn't provide treatment at the scene or even necessarily on the way to the hospital. They were just about getting you to the hospital as quickly as possible.
Which kind of makes sense in a way. It is, after all, where the doctors are.
But as a result, it often wasn't clear whose responsibility it was to rush to the scene of an accident.
Before the evolution of EMS, who did you call? Well, I was a paid firefighter back in the 60s, and sometimes we got the call. If somebody needed a fire truck in the city of New York, there were fireboxes everywhere. You'd pull the handle, and fire personnel and fire equipment would show up.
In other areas, the responsibility for transporting patients often fell to local funeral homes.
So imagine that. You're having a massive heart attack, your life's in the balance, and who rolls up to save you? 2 morticians in a hearse.
Okay, pause.
In many major cities, this crucial task fell to another.
So I think something the 99% invisible, if I may be critical for a moment, it's all very much like it discusses the origins of things in America.
Yeah.
I have to wonder, is the EMT, the question is, I don't think it's going to be answered because it's a different kind of question.
Right.
That probably would need another. But is the EMT an American invention? I have a hard time believing that no emergency services in Europe were. Maybe it was a kind of an innovation that was concurrent, like it was all happening at the same time. Yeah. But as far from the story of the EMT development in America, it was done by the marginalized first, the black men of Pittsburg. And the Europeans didn't have that, but I have to wonder with their, maybe their emergency services were already here. It's just that in America, things were backwards.
Well, as we get more into the story, they do talk about how they consulted with a professor who was looking at helping people survive longer in emergency situations and stuff. So
yeah,
it's possible that no one had really conceived of it in this way before that point. And maybe this was completely innovative here because it didn't sound like they drew inspiration from anywhere else in the world. But again, that could just be American centrism.
Yeah. Or maybe the Freedom House. They, sometimes these stories, because I did skim some of the text, it doesn't say where they got the idea. But when you think about how the stuff that the Black Panthers were doing, they were inspired by Mao. And Mao was then in turn inspired by previous guerrilla campaigns of various Sun Tzu.
That could be. There could be a longer lineage that they just don't get into here. That'd be interesting to find out.
But as a history buff, it's like there's always another step. There's always something else that is another soil that was fertile.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, just thinking about it in a kind of a logical sense, you'd think that with all the world wars and stuff that we've been through, having emergency medics on the battlefield and stuff, that it would make more sense if it came out of something like that. And they're like, hey, why don't we just apply this to civilian life? But
I believe the ambulance itself was developed in World War One.
Okay.
I don't think there were ambulances before. I think it was a matter of just whatever vehicles around. But I think the surprise is that it was kind of assumed that EMT was something that was developed concurrently with the ambulance, maybe, because when it was in the battlefield, you would have battlefield medics, and they would get in the ambulance with the wounded.
Right.
How did that not get transferred over to civilian life when you had ambulances? But I think the American entrepreneurial spirit is that a lot of these ambulances were private, or you had competing emergency services, fire department versus police department. And say New York, you had at one time competing police departments, competing firehouses that would fight each other over who got to put out the fire or whatever because they were paid on commission or something.
I knew that history with the fire departments, because fire departments used to have to like buy a fire
Yeah.
insurance basically and stuff. I had not heard that about police before. I didn't know there was
Yeah, there were two
competing
different
police
departments. And they would and they were
Insanity.
again like competing gangs. One one group of police would actually break out like the criminals of the other police, to make their catch rate lower. Or whatever.
Oh wow, that would be an
stuff.
interesting bit of history to dive into at some point.
Well, again, I think it's
Municipal
something
service,
else.
they're
No, keep
go ahead.
going. No, keep going.
Okay.
probably had even less business responding to medical emergencies. The police.
In the area where I was a firefighter, we had a police department that had a 57 Chevrolet wagon. That was an emergency response vehicle.
So the idea the general public was faced with was more or less what I would call swoop and scoop, which simply meant that you'd call the police, they'd rush the person out there to you, and then they'd pick you up, put you in the back, and rush you back down to the hospital.
With minimal training and equipment, John Moon says police departments could do little more than offer patients basic first aid, a canvas stretcher, a half-empty oxygen tank, and a pillow.
Which more often than not only served to choke off the patient's airway.
And on top of that, both individual, meaning police officers, got up front and left you back there by yourself. So if you stopped breathing by the time you arrived, you were perhaps DOA because no one had done anything for you.
The police simply didn't have the tools, the training, or the disposition to save people in a medical emergency. But in the absence of a dedicated emergency medical service, the job was being left to them by default.
And perhaps nowhere was the problem of relying on the police for help more vividly illustrated than in Pittsburgh's largely black Hill District.
Moon says the city's mostly white police force was often slow to respond to emergencies in the Hill, while the black residents, for their part, were reluctant to even call the police to begin with.
Because there was a trust issue with the police, primarily because there were no constraints. I mean, they could do whatever they wanted, and there was no repercussion or consequences for their actions.
No one wanted to get into the exact same police van that the cops had threatened to throw them in the day before.
So there was issues all the way around. Do I really want to call the police? Chances are they're going to take their time getting here, number one. And if I wait too long, then chances are a cab won't come to my neighborhood, primarily because of fear of being robbed or whatever the case is. So the options were very limited during that time.
And the same was true to varying degrees in the rest of the country. Whether a neighborhood was served by the police, or the fire department, or the local funeral home, so long as the priority was transportation as opposed to treatment, no one even realized that there was a job that needed doing.
But then, in the mid-60s, something happened which flipped the paradigm for emergency care on its head and laid the groundwork for the invention of paramedicine.
In 1966, the federal government published a white paper that would prove so influential that even now, in EMS circles, it is simply called the White Paper.
Basically, it told us we were killing over 50,000 people a year on the highways and doing so unnecessarily, that there was a way to intervene and save those people. But we didn't have the people, nor the resources, nor the training to do a whole lot about it.
Techniques practiced by combat medics overseas had been largely ignored by the medical community, with the result that a person was more likely to die of a gunshot wound in America than on a battlefield in Vietnam.
The white paper shamed the government into providing money for EMS development on the local level, and government officials and local community leaders began searching for solutions, including a community organizer in Pittsburgh named Phil Hallen.
Oh my God, why do I do this?
Hallen is a former ambulance attendant who came to Pittsburgh in the early 60s, and yes, he hates being interviewed.
Okay, how long are we going to be going on this? I don't last very long at age 90.
Hallen ran a civil rights organization called the Maurice Falk Medical Fund, which examined health disparities due to institutional racism, and he immediately focused his ire on the city's pitiful emergency services. What was your impression of the level of care that was available in Pittsburgh?
Well, it wasn't my impression of it. It was the way it was, There wasn't any level of care. There was no such thing as emergency medicine or any of the things we now look back on and think, what the hell was going on? No, there was nothing. I mean, nobody was trained, especially the cops.
He could see that what was going on was effectively a public health crisis that was disproportionately affecting black neighborhoods.
But then one day, Helen came across an article in the local paper about a black-operated jobs training program based in the Hill District called Freedom House.
The article described how Freedom House had rolled out a kind of mobile grocery store for black neighborhoods, using trucks to bring fresh vegetables to people's doors.
And I thought, well, healthcare is terrible in the Hill District. We have to do something. If they could run a grocery van around, why can't we run a medical van around or something like that?
Okay. I just remembered what first inspired me to dig up this episode again. And it's I heard the story about in Albuquerque. They recently approved behavioral health specialists to be able to be dispatched through 911 calls. So they will send master's level behavioral health clinicians out to people's houses. So basically taking over where police used to do, wellness checks and stuff like that. They're going to take over and do that. And this too.
They're like the sixth city to do that.
Yeah.
Right?
But
I don't know how many, but it's a growing list. I think Denver has started that program. I was covering it on my show on one of my police abolition episodes.
Cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good trend, I would say. And
it's interesting that what is hitting me is the kind of acknowledgement that in a stable country like America, as long as we are stable, that to kind of create change is not really to take state power. That's not going to happen as long as things are stable. And it's not even through mass civil disobedience can get something changed, but it's not going to be acknowledged change. It's not going to be something that the establishment's going to take up. Or if they do, it will be half-assed. For example, the inclusion of blacks and minorities in institutions. It will be done through what is this? Affirmative action.
Oh, affirmative action.
Which, in a way that will be eroded over time or can be easily opposed, if not later, but right away. Similar to kind of police abolition stuff that is happening now, like in the repeal of bail. Reactionaries just have a field day with it. Any increase in crime, even if it's just two more murders, this is because of bail reform. This is because we stopped jailing everyone who smokes pot.
Right. As if poor people are just inherently violent, and that's why they shouldn't be allowed out.
It makes you wonder why liberals and such aren't as more genocidal than they are against their own citizens.
Right.
With the way they talk about the problem of crime, it's like, why don't we just kill the poor? It's like why don't you just accept that's what you want to do?
Yeah.
But you're too nice, so you just want to do it slowly or something. Or like, what is your solution? Like this happened in a Facebook convo locally, where yes buts or but I'm not racist. It was like a mentioning of again, it was reactionaries reacting to a rising crime rate. If there even is one, but let's say there is. And he was saying like, this all started. Well, they didn't say that, but they were implying that this is because we stopped charging in New York teenagers like adults. A sensible but necessary reform, right? Not a big revolutionary thing, but just stop charging kids or teenagers as adults on locking them up for 10 years because they stole something at a Walmart.
Right.
Or something of that nature. Or like they were present during some gang violence. They didn't do it, they were around, or they were part of the gang, something like that. So anyway, so we dropped that reform. Of course, they're still put in jail for maybe 2 years, or it's juvie. But the point is, I said like, well, the the gangs are like they're recruiting kids because they know they won't be locked up. They'll go to family court, and so they'll get a slap on the wrist, and so they can keep coming back to do crimes. And I'm like, but you know what causes crime? We need to attack poverty. We need to
Right.
solve that. And then we can worry about like what the kid, I mean, maybe if we didn't cut all of our after school programs, the kids wouldn't have nothing to do. And I got, of course, the liberal reaction or the right-leaning reaction is, yeah, it's sort of part of it, but they just wanted to say it was like a bunch of other stuff. And like, yeah, poverty is a part of it, but there's all this other stuff too.
Right.
And like, it was just, I was done. You know, I wasn't going to argue it so much, as much just make fun of them almost. Tease
Well,
them.
I think that's largely because liberals, especially college-educated liberals, want to believe that a meritocracy, although we maybe don't have a quite meritocracy now in America, but that one is possible and also good, and that wouldn't also leave a whole bunch of people behind.
In my last episode, and I'm not the only one doing this because I was reading an article from The Atlantic about how meritocracy is a nightmare.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
the victory, so like we beat back the establishment of like, you know, aristocrats in the 60s and 70s. That's kind of what was, from liberal progressive point of view, what was the problem. And they won, and we do have a meritocracy. And it means everyone has to work harder. You know, so the billionaires have, you know, worked hard to be millionaires and billionaires, but now that means everyone else has to work hard too.
Right.
It's a running treadmill that, because the economic model is infinite growth, and and productivity must increase, and meritocracy is the way of keeping people on that treadmill.
Right.
By saying, like, in order to be worthy of being a citizen, you actually have to work harder to earn your place.
Right.
Because hey,
to stand out, to get ahead.
at least, and that's what's fair. It's Squid Game.
Right.
It's fair.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
fair because we all have to work hard. At least, like, you know, it was apparently more unjust that you had people who didn't have to work hard to be elites. But that meant that, you know, the poor could also be lazy or something. Because like, well, why should I work hard if the people in power didn't have to work hard? But now these meritocrats are in power, and they're like, well, now you have no excuse. You cannot be lazy because we're not lazy.
Right.
And that's like, well, it's still kind of a fuck you, because so it's like, it's fair within the market, but then you have to argue that things are unfair from an identity point of view or something like that. And then it drives liberals crazy, even though, or that's all they're able to do, because they're not able to look at the superstructure,
Right.
the economic model,
They're not able to see that keeping
the treadmill, that they're on a treadmill.
that
The treadmill isn't there.
right. That you know, keeping capitalism together means the inherent exploitation of capitalism, of being able to take the product of other people's labor, just because you're the owner. So just because the right people are in place as the owner, you know, the best and brightest are the owners, that doesn't end that exploitation at all. That means still that people get left behind and get taken advantage of just by more competent and smarter people.
But I got off track. So my point is that in a stable system like America, to get the establishment to adopt what we want, like, we have to kind of do it ourselves, do it well, and then they'll adopt it once they recognize that it's better, that they can adopt it, and it doesn't change the power dynamics, like the ability for EMTs to function and to increase. I mean, again, it mentions the federal white paper, right? So this was a movement, but it was solved by marginal people. But that doesn't stop the establishment from basically taking their model of things and then applying it, which is what I think the next paragraph explains.
Right.
And that goes for mutual aid stuff. That's why I don't really see it as revolutionary work. I mean, it's necessary,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
like the food bank we have, a regional food bank, they get money from the county and among all their other donors, but they get funding from local government, county government, to basically do mass mutual aid, so to speak, of food distribution.
Yeah.
And I think the only reason we have like a working food not bombs is because the food bank is in certain areas and you kind of need to go to them, or that the food bank is operating through more exclusionary channels. Like there isn't just a place in every neighborhood to get pickup stuff. There is a sort of version of that, but it's through Catholic Charities. So I think they have a separate food bank system, which is pretty nice, and I've used it. So actually, I think it is the recognized public distribution of getting just sheer basics, but you do get some meat too. It's not nothing.
Yeah.
But it's not something everyone's using, or even like when you're disabled, you have to walk at most maybe 8 blocks, but it isn't. It could be even smaller scale, but no, actually, no. One of them is the right scale, the right size for the neighborhood, because I could walk there.
Okay.
But yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. No. I definitely see what you're saying. There's always the risk that whatever sort of apparatus you set up can be co-opted by some larger institution, and then the part where it ends up not making revolutionary changes is they take it and then put it through their own lens. So now if you take it over by, say, Catholic Charities, you're not doing mutual aid, you're doing charity. So we're going to give food to these people despite them not deserving it. It's not just neighbor helping out neighbor because, I got a little bit extra of this, you got a little bit extra of that.
It's through the lens of deserving poor and what do you call it? Means testing.
Yeah,
you have to have your Medicaid card or your EBT card to use the food bank.
Right. Absolutely.
So you basically already need to go through the bureaucratic process of being on food stamps.
Yep.
So, but
I can totally see that for sure. So, yeah, be careful when the government comes into or any sort of large institution comes in to try and.
But if you're doing something right, and the government's stable, then they're able to take it from you. So, kind of an argument for the accelerationists, but the insurrectionary of like, well, then we need to destabilize the government. Then, when we do our mutual aid projects, it will be the only game in town. Or when we do our assembly, it will actually have more moral authority than the local government, which isn't able to pay the fire department or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Or in this case, the new ambulance services could be funded. They just weren't funded before because of racism. But
for sure,
it was that and the fact that the EMT didn't even exist as a category. So it's an interesting intersection there.
For sure.
Because white people be dying too.
I mean, that's definitely was the case.
Because it said on the highways. Like, how many are being transported on the highways? Maybe it increased because of suburbia. When the distance between your hospital is always, it's like there's a hospital in every 5 block or 10 blocks in a city. Then and I think everybody pretty much knew how to treat injuries when you're on a farm. Like, you weren't going to, I mean, I guess if you had a heart attack, you're just dead. But and that's a problem. That was one of the things about the Great Society or the New Deal was to hospitals in rural areas. So there was a place to go. Sure. Something that we basically need to do again. That's why a new Green New Deal would include that, because there are many rural areas that actually still don't have actually good health care. Maybe a clinic, but nothing that could treat cancer. They have to go 5 counties away or half a state away.
Yeah. Definitely a good point. All right, let's continue on.
Hallen wasn't envisioning anything like modern emergency medical services. At first, he just thought Freedom House's trucks could help transport people in underserved neighborhoods to the hospital, and that they could hire people from the Hill District to drive them.
But that's when I got the director of the university hospital on this group as well. And, before the first meeting was over, he said, "Oh my God, we have to go immediately to Saffir."
The experimental study you are about to see is one of 18 similar studies during which we compared various methods of artificial respiration.
Dr. Peter Saffir was the head of anesthesiology at the University of Pittsburgh, and by that time, he was already famous in medical circles.
Saffir was a pure scientist and a very precise and impatient Austrian.
We simulated field conditions by selecting as subjects men and women of various body types.
This is a film of Saffir from 1951, demonstrating a new technique he developed for resuscitation, what today we call CPR.
To help orient you, we have made a diagram of the experimental setup.
Saffir understood that to be effective, resuscitation needed to be started immediately by the first person on the scene. But he faced heavy resistance from the medical community, which felt the general public couldn't be trusted with such specialized knowledge.
So Saffir performed an experiment.
By anesthetizing and curarizing these subjects, we simulated limp asphyxia victims.
Saffir paralyzed a group of volunteers using a chemical compound from the Amazon, normally used on poison-tipped arrows. Let's just say medical testing has changed a lot.
Once the volunteers could no longer breathe on their own, Saffir had untrained lay people use CPR to keep those volunteers alive. And when I say untrained lay people, I mean children.
This Boy Scout will perform mouth-to-airway breathing.
Ultimately, Saffir's views would be vindicated, and for his effort, he'd forever be known as the father of CPR.
Hallen already knew some of this when he walked into Peter Saffir's office in 1966. But nothing could have prepared him for what actually happened.
Within seconds of greeting Hallen and the Freedom House team, the wiry and energetic Saffir began to unleash a torrent of ideas.
Basically, he said, "You are just what I'm looking for. I've been trying to figure out how to take rescue breathing and the rest out on the street and to train people how to do that. You got the people."
But Saffir didn't stop there. He wasn't content to just teach some van drivers CPR.
They said, "Let's go beyond that. Let's train them to be professionals as well."
Professionals who could provide high-quality medical care before the person was even taken to the hospital.
It was not go to the scene, pick up a patient, transport to a hospital, and then start care. It was emergency treatment right there on the pavement.
Instead of repurposed cargo spaces, Saffir argued that ambulances should be mobile intensive care units staffed by professionals trained to use cardiac monitors, administer medication, and anything else that might keep a patient alive.
Hallen and the others could barely keep up. Saffir wasn't proposing a simple update to the existing system, but to change the whole culture of pre-hospital care. And he wanted to do it using Freedom House.
I think somebody said, "Well, how big? What are we talking about here?" He said, I can remember this, I can instruct 40 people. And, and inside of a half an hour, we realized that there was something going on here which was way beyond anything that we had thought of.
Saffir set about designing advanced ambulances and an intense 300-hour course whose graduates would be the world's first comprehensively trained first responders. This wasn't just the birth of a profession, but of a whole new branch of medicine. It would become a vital link in the chain with a subculture all its own.
And the world's first fully trained paramedics would be staffed exclusively with young black men from the Hill District of Pittsburgh.
And the people that worked there all were labeled unemployable.
Freedom House recruited many of its first students right off the street, most of whom were just happy to land a good job, even if they were a little fuzzy on the details.
John Moon wasn't part of that first class. He signed up a little later. But even he admits that, as incredible as he thought the opportunity was, he didn't fully understand what he was getting into.
On some level, he was just excited to finally be wearing the uniform with the cool emblem that he saw on the first night.
I'll put it this way. if someone bought you $1,000 suit and just gave it to you and said, just walk up and down the street in it, how would you feel? That's the way I felt. I was at the point where, okay, I got this uniform. That's all it takes to help people. And boy, was I wrong. It took a little bit more than that.
After they
Just
signed
audio,
up,
Sam.
Moon and the others underwent a battery of psychological evaluations and interviews with medical professionals. They learned anatomy, physiology, CPR, advanced first aid, nursing, and defensive driving.
At first under Saffer, but later under Freedom House's first medical director, a 30-year-old white doctor with no previous ambulance experience named Nancy Caroline.
And we looked at her with skepticism because you have to remember, she's not black. But once we found out that her heart was with us, that was really nothing she could do wrong. And everywhere she went, she took us with her.
Caroline got the trainees access to almost every department of the hospital. She had them work in the morgue, the anesthesiology suite, and the maternity ward.
And of course, if they were going to bring the ICU to the street, they had to master everything that happened in an ICU.
So that included spinal immobilization, cervical immobilization, IV insertion. And the advantages of classroom training for us at that particular time is we would learn a procedure in class, or she would teach it to us, and then we would go out a half hour, 45 minutes later after we got out of class and perform that procedure on the person.
And Freedom House paramedics were often the first people to perform that procedure outside of a hospital.
They were among the first to use Narcan to reverse an overdose, and the first to save a patient by shocking their heart in the field. Moon told me that the biggest first he personally experienced came on a call where Nancy Caroline was riding along.
It was a patient having trouble breathing. He was unconscious.
So Moon started calling it in. But then Nancy Caroline stopped him.
And lo and behold, she said, start an IV and intubate this patient. And I said, repeat that. She says, start an IV and intubate this patient.
Moon thinks he was the first paramedic who was ever asked to intubate someone in the field. I wasn't able to confirm that, but intubation, the subtle but critical art of snaking a breathing tube into a patient's trachea, is an incredibly difficult procedure. I've gone through the training. It's not easy, even in a hospital setting. And here they were doing it on the sidewalk. Moon says he was scared to death.
And once I gathered my nerves together and remembered how she had taught us in the anatomy lab, I went ahead and did it. And once I intubated the person and took him to the emergency room, I had to deal with the ER doctor saying, well, who intubated this person? Who caused them to be intubated? And I said, I did. And you are? I said, well, my name is John Moon, and I'm a paramedic at Freedom House Ambulance Service.
But it wasn't enough for Moon and the other paramedics to simply master the techniques required for emergency medical care. Freedom House personnel faced an even bigger challenge from the moment they got the call.
The city had contracted with Freedom House to handle calls in Pittsburgh's mostly black neighborhoods in the downtown area, but the Pittsburgh police dispatchers often refused to send them.
Because the police looked at us as someone taking their jobs away, but Freedom House looked at the police as being a threat to the patient. And
To me, this is so ridiculous. This is a service of the police where performing very poorly.
Yeah, but it was theirs. I mean, you know how white supremacy works. You take away,
Sure.
You take a white, man's ability to wipe his ass, and that's tyranny. You're taking away part of who they are, and of course, especially if it's a black man, then it's just an insult.
I mean, that must be
Of
it. There
course they're
must be
gonna-
that racist component to why they wouldn't want to stop doing a thing they sucked at
Well,
and
see,
hated doing.
these maybe this is the difference between like a show like 99 Invisible that can truly be a mass audience show and something that we would make that would be that isn't is that we would just call them racist and leave it at that. While they're like, oh, we need to frame it in it's an economic reason that they were going to take their jobs. It was a financial thing. True. Or sort, but it wasn't really a financial thing because it's not like they were going to actually lose their jobs or something, but it was less work for them. Shouldn't the police want to be more lazy and do less work?
Right.
But again, it's another thing that they would have control over, and that matters when you're racist, when white supremacy and institutions like that need to be upheld. So that's kind of what needs to be. It's like that's what's at stake and should be stated as that. Same thing in foreign policy stuff, what's at stake in U.S. protecting the Taiwanese government, even though it's not really the Taiwanese, but the Kuomintang. Something like that. What was hitting me with listening to this? I want to something that is kind of being glossed over is how is it that this hospital, which is obviously probably owned and run by whites, that they would allow this group of 40 black men to be trained in medical services by this one particular nurse in Sackler?
Yeah.
I guess they had the clout to say, we're going to do this and we're going to commission it. And then, what's left out is how did they said the city actually commissioned them for this. What was involved with that? That sounds like a political fight on its own to basically maybe they just saw it as a no-brainer, and enough city council people being maybe downtown residents, they're not hostile to this thing. But again, it's a matter of, well, if it's going to work, it's working. But at the time, it was unproven. So like, maybe just compared to the skittish Democrats today of like, oh, we have to study this for 3 years. We need someone else to do it who's completely like that we can trust. We can't trust community people to do it, sort of thing. Or when community people do things on their own without permission, then they're heroes and they're given some kind of plaque later.
But you're totally right. That's definitely a component that they've left out of the story is how did they get to that point where they got the go ahead? There must have been someone who like maybe had a family member die and was in a powerful place, and they saw that the police did not do well saving them, and just said, well, okay, look, we got to change this. Let's give it a go. Or perhaps maybe the medical professionals at the hospital were just their overriding desire to help as many people as possible pushed it forward. But yeah, they just kind of left it out of the story. So, all right, let's continue on.
One of the things that we had to put in place is we use a police scanner, and we would monitor the calls, and we would subsequently try to get to the scene before they did.
Moon recalls getting to the scene just seconds after the police arrived.
Sounds like
seeing them try to
vigilantes.
drag patients out of wrecked cars.
And here we are saying, no, you can't do this. Let's put them on a spine board and put a cervical collar on them.
But remember, these were a bunch of black guys from the Hill lecturing mostly white cops.
And we're yelling at them, and they're cussing us out.
Sometimes the police would relent, but other times they would threaten the paramedics with arrest unless they backed off.
And, the only thing you can do is just stand back and say, okay. And then you watch them drag the individual out of the car and put them in the back of a paddy wagon, and both guys get up front and they race off to the hospital. So those were oftentimes battles that you were not going to win.
And it wasn't just the cops who didn't understand. Patients couldn't fathom why Moon was using a cardiac monitor and starting IVs in their house instead of hurrying them to a doctor.
Their idea was, let's call the ambulance. The ambulance comes to pick you up and take you to the hospital. That's all they knew. And it wasn't the easiest thing in the world to explain to a family member that we have brought the emergency room to the person.
Trying to convince white patients to submit to treatment was especially difficult. Some wouldn't even let the black paramedics touch them.
That was frowned upon on more than one occasion, where they would say, no, do you have to really do this? I would prefer that you not do it. And it's something that we had to endure, because the problem was not with us. The problem was with the patient. It was their belief or their preconceived notion about the individuals that were touching them.
The same went for doctors and nurses at any hospital not directly affiliated with SAFR and the Freedom House program.
Moon remembers trying to read a patient's vital signs, only to have a nurse laugh in his face, as if he was pretending to play doctor. Other Freedom House paramedics were mistaken for orderlies and asked to mop the floor.
But despite all the struggle, Freedom House's reputation was growing.
People were beginning to recognize that something really different was going on here. This wasn't just call the ambulance.
Phil Hallen says stories started to spread about an ambulance service that could perform miraculous life-saving procedures at the scene of horrific accidents.
Perhaps the most influential story was about a kid on his bike who was hit head-on by a car. The accident was in Squirrel Hill, one of the city's most affluent neighborhoods, and one that Freedom House had never been allowed to enter.
So initially, the dispatcher sent the police, but the cops panicked. The kid was bleeding out in front of them, and they had no idea what to do.
And somebody said, get Freedom House up here. And they did a miraculous activity, which nobody had ever seen take place on the street before. People watched it happen. And that was a major turning point.
By this time, Freedom House's 5 ambulances were running nearly 6,000 calls a year and providing demonstrably better care. At a city council meeting, SAFR presented data showing that as many as 1,200 people a year had been dying needlessly.
Go for it.
That anecdote reminds me of in the last 2 weeks, I went to the local comedy scene open mic. They're like almost every week at different bars, and something I kind of noticed. And again, I was one of many white dudes at this place, and most were like there to do the open mic. So it was kind of a circle jerk kind of thing. But they're all like working off each other. They're all friends, or it's a scene. And it was one of the times where, maybe because it was amateur, but like entertainment usually doesn't make me unpleasant. There's usually something I can find I like about it. Much of it was unpleasant. It was just unfunny. And that's my conclusion after much thought and consultation with other friends was that good comedy, like any kind of good writing or art, you have to do what you know.
Right.
And my conclusion is all of these guys, whether they be cishet white or whatever, was that they didn't know anything. They had no personal experiences. It seemed that they either felt comfortable drawing from, or that they never had anything funny happen to them or something. Like they could only make jokes about edgy stuff from other people. And what was the context? But the guy ended his set by actually making a joke about a kid getting hit by a car. And how what was it? Oh yeah, it was a kind of funny joke where, I mean, it was sort of funny in that, like, I got scraped saving this kid from walking into traffic, and I think the owner was like, he had cut off half of their bill, right, for doing this, as a show, a gesture of like, oh, good job doing that.
Sure.
And I'm like, that's actually a good positive story. But of course, he is they should be paying me not just a free meal, but more or something. I don't know.
Oh,
look at all the money I saved you. Imagine the bad press of a kid bleeding out in front of your restaurant. And that was the
joke.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But at least there was a punchline. Most of
Yeah.
the problem with a lot of the acts, and this is just 5-minute open mic, but whatever. They didn't have a lot of time, but it's also some of them would only have 2 minutes of material and just try to vamp the rest. It was very, very sad. But some of it was that they didn't have punchlines. I was writing punchlines in my head while they were doing their set, and that's a problem, right? I'm not being entertained. I'm trying to entertain myself,
Right.
because you had guys where sometimes the act would be just how pathetic and what a loser they are or something. It would be self-deprecating. We're supposed to laugh at that, but like everyone here in this room is a loser apparently. So no one, because no one was laughing at their jokes about being a loser. One of them where was like, I'm so dumb. You know how dumb I am? How dumb are you?
Yeah. Oh boy.
One of the few who actually wanted obvious participation, I think. But it's like, I'm so dumb, I flunked college. And then like the punchline was, and then I flunked it again.
What?
You repeated the punchline. That was 3, you know, you rule 3.
Yeah.
And the other example of like college bashing was like, oh, I went to college to make my comedy better. So I got a literature, but then I got a degree in Asian American literature. And that was the joke. Like, what am I like?
What?
That was it. That was the joke. And I'm like, shouldn't there be a third part where you say like how do I make aim?
You're cutting out there, Dan.
Sorry. I only like the acts that had detail.
There we go.
So when he didn't make a detail, like making a reference to an actual Asian American author, then I'm like, well, you didn't actually do any research for this joke. You didn't put in any effort. I'm not respecting this.
No.
So yeah. And yeah, but I went because a guy I knew who's an anarchist, he wanted to make jokes about anarchists. And he also kind of didn't do well. He didn't have a full punchline. He stopped at 2. You need 3. And so like, part 1, anarchists, I hate anarchists a lot. They're my least favorite people, being one, we have meetings that are so long, we had a 6-hour meeting. And the punchline is, and it was just about moving a bookshelf. And that was the punchline. And I'm like, that's not enough.
Oh,
when I get home,
so hacky too.
Yeah. And when I get home, I think, how could this have worked? And I think to myself, okay, need a pun that has to do with a bookshelf, at the very least. And long meetings. And I'm like, I got it. We had, anarchists have really long meetings. Democracy, it's a messy thing, One time, we were making a decision about where to move a bookshelf, and it took 6 hours. And even after those 6 hours, the only thing we could decide on that, we had to shelve the discussion.
That's an actual joke. Wow. Very, very good. Had to shelve this. Wow. Did you tell him later on the joke? I
will eventually.
You should help him workshop that
tomorrow when I see him at Food Not Bombs.
That's funny.
The alternative being, we had the table, the discussion.
Yeah. You can make that about moving a table, sure.
Yeah.
While in the care of other emergency services, Freedom House paramedics, by contrast, had saved 200 lives in the first year alone.
Damn.
Doctors and medical directors from around the country flocked to Pittsburg.
Because I want to let that statistic have a little more
Major
impact.
turning point.
Hill, one of the
repeat
city's
it?
most affluent neighborhoods.
I can reverse it. It just I gotta back it up.
Did you need to rewind a bit? Because that's worth doing.
Yeah. I rewound just a little bit. So.
And one that Freedom House had never been allowed to enter.
So initially, the dispatcher sent the police, but the cops panicked. The kid was bleeding out in front of them, and they had no idea what to do.
And somebody said, get Freedom House up here. And they did a miraculous activity, which nobody had ever seen take place on the street before. People watched it happen. And that was a major turning point.
And us racism.
By this time, Freedom House's 5 ambulances were running nearly 6,000 calls a year and providing demonstrably better care. At a city council meeting, Saffer presented data showing that as many as 1,200 people a year had been dying needlessly while in the care of other emergency services. Freedom House paramedics, by contrast, had saved 200 lives in the first year alone.
That's amazing.
Actually, yeah, to maybe to work off of whatever Uncomfortable Truth and the other a COD guy is doing. Racism is actually really good. Without it, we wouldn't have EMT services.
Oh God.
Which is like saying without slavery, we wouldn't have blues and
Oh.
good and jazz, right?
It's amazing how many conservatives will literally make that sort of argument.
But here's where we can turn it around and say, like, whiteness really, there is nothing to be proud of, because when you think about everything that, say, Americans have accomplished,
Mm-hmm.
I think when it comes to culture and innovation,
Mm-hmm.
I think it can all be traced back to like what Black people have had to do
Heck of a lot
under the constraints and the situations that white supremacy creates.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nothing makes you innovate more than constraints.
Right.
And because necessity is the mother of invention.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, either that or you're Edison and you have to make 50 different light bulbs and just to make something that's 2% better, but it's actually not 2% better. It's actually 50% cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't really about making a better light bulb. It was about making a more profitable light bulb.
Sure.
That's Edison's innovation. The innovation
Really?
of profitability.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, really. Yeah, there have always been better light bulbs,
Okay.
but they cost more to produce.
I
But they last longer, and it's just quality over quantity. With Edison, it was just a matter of quantity, because the problem was about mass electrification. So I guess there is a point can be made about that, right?
Sure.
But of course, you couldn't do the mass electrification without alternating current, which is Tesla's side.
Sure.
So it's a team effort.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Everything is a team effort. That's for sure.
Anyway.
All right.
Doctors and medical directors from around the country flocked to Pittsburgh. Freedom House medics were invited to conferences as far away as Germany. Everyone wanted to see what they were doing and learn how they could copy it. And in 1975, the federal government chose Freedom House to field test the first standardized training curriculum for EMS providers. And Nancy Caroline was asked to write the textbook.
But Freedom House's growing reputation would ultimately prove to be its greatest liability.
The more successes they chalked up, the more certain residents and city officials wanted to see Freedom House gone. And according to John Moon, it was for a simple reason.
How dare you have an EMS system or an ambulance service this good serving the Black economically deprived community, or as society says, those people. And we don't have anything like that.
Yeah, we're the ones
Perhaps
obsessed with
no
rights.
one did more to punish Freedom House for this transgression.
That's such an infuriating way of thinking. How dare you take this problem that we weren't solving, solve it for yourselves, and then not give it back to us? Holy shit.
I think the advantage of progs and liberals is that they don't do that, but they're like, oh, yay, you solved the problem we weren't doing anything about.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Good for you. We'll take it
And
from
the
here.
fact that you're doing well reflects better on me, because I support you in your efforts to not die.
Uh-huh.
So,
Man.
so it is better than what we're
Than
hearing.
that.
But again,
You're right.
but see, the difference is back in the 70s. See, the progress is that it was the liberals who were saying these things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It was not just a liberal, because it was a totality of society.
Right,
The difference is, at least liberals or left of liberal will at least say good for you.
Yeah. At least.
and we'll let
credit.
you do what you do, and maybe we'll actually throw you some money.
Right.
Maybe if you work with the party.
For sure.
But only locally. If it's nationally, well, maybe we'll try to get you what you want in the budget. Oh no, the conservatives, we got to compromise.
Yeah, that's
Sorry,
right.
no extra
Oh, no.
social spending for you.
Any little stumbling.
We tried our
block.
best. We're on your side.
Oh no, two members of our own party don't want something. Well, let's
Yeah,
cut our.
but it's not
budget.
because they're racist.
No.
It's because they care about the debt. and the
Yes,
deficit
all of a sudden they care very much,
and spending.
very deeply about debts and spending, even though they can't explain why they're important.
Why? Yeah, right. When you're look when the true advantage of power is that you don't have to explain yourself, and this is the case with this Pittsburgh establishment, that they don't have to explain why they don't want Freedom House to succeed,
Right.
or why they'd want the poor to die more. But if you do scratch it, you'll get fascist leanings or beliefs, or just really moralistic kinds of the most toxic religious beliefs of, well,
Oh, for sure.
see, you're poor because you're undeserving. If
Right.
you're deserving, you
God is
wouldn't be
punishing
poor.
you. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So why? So which is anti-Christian for the most part.
I would
but that
agree.
just- That just shows
That's beside
how
the point.
antithetical capitalism is from Christianity. So you get these ideologies that to buttress capitalist, mode of
Yeah.
production of that the poor should just die so that there's always more poor people. Because if the poor are doing well, they could actually maybe be a counterpower or whatever. Okay. Let's not get off track too much.
Then Pittsburgh's mayor.
Elected in 1969, 45-year-old Pete Flaherty was a fiscally conservative Democrat. Tall and broad-shouldered, he went into office already believing programs using taxpayer money should be managed entirely by the city. But ask Phil Hallen, and he'll tell you he believes that the mayor's beef with Freedom House went beyond issues of fiscal or bureaucratic turf. What was his opinion of Freedom House?
Well, I didn't like it particularly because it was doing too well and it was black.
You think that's why he felt that?
Actually, we'll keep it playing for just a second. We'll rewind if we need to for Dan.
That way?
I think so.
Was it your opinion that he was racist?
Yes.
When Flaherty took office, he slashed Freedom House's operating budget in half. This didn't leave enough money to cover even routine maintenance on the ambulances. Caroline repeatedly wrote frustrated missives to Freedom House's board, complaining about brakes and steering that locked up, doors that fell from the hinges, and seats that toppled over.
Ugh.
Once, according to Caroline, an engine caught fire while transporting a patient.
Flaherty passed an ordinance that
What are they
banned
talking about?
ambulances from using their sirens.
So basically, I think it was the mayor, this
What I
Flaherty
missed.
guy, slashed
Yeah.
Freedom House's budget in half.
Oh, okay. Because
Basically,
they were being funded by the city.
yeah.
They weren't directly under the city.
Right. He did
'Cause
it
it wasn't
under
matter.
the pretext of every government service, every state of service
Yeah.
should be under the city's control, or anything that's getting government money should be under government control.
And if it was, then you could basically fire all of these unemployables because, well, they're unemployable. They
Right,
shouldn't
right,
have been
right,
employed.
right.
It's not that,
Yeah.
look, the being unemployable doesn't mean that, like, you can't work. It's actually that it's the belief that some people shouldn't work.
Right. Yeah.
That's something that's very important for liberals to understand
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to market economics, that there needs to be unemployable people. And it's
Yeah.
not a matter that they just can't work because they're addicts, because addicts can work,
Oh, absolutely.
but it's not they shouldn't work
Right.
or whatever. Even though there's this belief that everyone doesn't have any moral standing unless you are working.
Mhm.
So, but maybe that's more a conservative side of things. So there's obviously a spectrum, and maybe some political compasses could be devised about just attitudes towards work,
Mhm.
because that is independent
Interesting.
of the usual compass.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, but what this mayor was doing is like the epitome of cutting off your nose to spite your face. Like literally letting people die just to prove wrong and ineffective people that are saving lives. And
Yeah.
that's
And it
all
happens
they're there
and it happens today. It's just done in maybe a less brazen way,
Yeah.
or it's
Oh, for
done with an austerity justification, or rather, because of the ways establishment works, you just wait 8 years when there's some kind of crisis. You just wait till the crisis hits, and then you have all the justification you need to make whatever changes or cuts you want.
everyone's got to tighten our belts. All that sort of rhetoric.
In the case of like New York and third parties, Como waited till the pandemic and basically said, okay, I have emergency powers. I'm going to basically make it impossible to run as third party now, and try to object, and the same goes with this guy. Just try objecting to me cutting your budget. What do you got to do about it?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is, of course, it's always fun when in the media it's like, what are you going to do about it? And it's like, well, okay, we'll see what I do about it. F around and find out.
That's right.
But there needs to be a plausible answer to that question. What are you going to do about it?
That's
and the answer is always, I'm going to organize everyone else that you've harmed or pissed off. It turns out it's a lot.
Yeah.
Or it's equal to the amount of people who like you because you've helped them.
That's right. Yeah. That is the only viable route, really.
As far as just people, just as numbers, because usually you have to factor in money and economic power, because that's usually how the scales are tipped.
Yeah.
And that's the real kind of situation. That we can organize some Starbucks, but it's not really a workers' economy, even if all of them are unionized. And there's the Starbucks union, and it's complete, like, it's still a corporation.
Right. And they still have very little, the individual worker has very little say in their working conditions and compensation.
And when things are automated in coffee making, like in car making, all those jobs will be gone, and then everything will have to shift again. And look how innovative capitalism is.
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah. We're not going to get to that point. I think what was it?
You think the wheels will fall off before that point?
Well, it's just coming up a little recently. It was mentioned a few times. Maybe it was the same person, but it was a review of the Stanford model. I don't know if it was Stanford, but it was like there was these economic models created in the 70s, with the computers of the time, and how when the same university does it again with all the new variables, including climate chaos and all that, basically the model is actually very, very resilient and has been accurate. That sometime in the 2030s there will be collapse. Or at the very least, we'll reach a height, and everything will start declining. In a serious,
what is it?
In a serious way, like food collapse.
Food collapse. So that's the predicted pressure point that's going to set the.
If nothing, if we continue business as usual, which is infinite growth.
Yeah. Well, and treating arable land as though it's something you can just do input in and output out of.
Because I think the issue of the aughts was that there was such a progs and liberals would focus on oil and peak oil, but not the entire industrial economy and its contradictions, which is something I think more of us millennials have been doing because our last two generations just haven't, or they didn't have the tools to. Because the situation was so stable. I mean, after the 70s, everything just was so stable. And now it's, well, I'm not saying that just, again, things are still very stable, but they just maybe appear stable. It's like, a Jenga tower.
Sure.
I think if we kind of look at how, like, we have a one-term Republican president, then maybe a one-term Democrat president, then maybe another, and then the president, instead of being 8-year terms, which is the limit, which is kind of a sign of stability, that the president will change every 4 years, because that's the version of acceleration.
So much unrest.
That's the acceleration that will be occurring. That everything is so calcified, so worthless, that the president will keep changing because nobody cares.
Oh, because nobody cares. Interesting.
I don't know. It's a mixture of things. It's a mixture of enough people not caring, and the people who do care work like the Dickens to win, and so we'll keep flopping. So maybe we'll have President DeSantis, after Biden, because, well, I'm just thinking about this because, like, of Chapo talking of how, like, the Democrats as a whole, the DNC is kind of pitching their choice they see in 3 years is like Buttigieg or Kamala. That's the future of the party or the next presidential candidates. There will probably be others, and then maybe it'll be somebody we never expected or is not expected now. But it will be, they kind of joked around how it'll be somebody like Eric Adams, someone he's the new mayor of New York City.
Ah, okay.
And he is wanting to be mayor for the last 30 years, and he's been on the grind mindset all this time. To the point where like it was undeniable he was like the candidate, and he did well in all the areas that didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, like the poor. Like he did well in the outer boroughs and not Manhattan. It kind of in the second runoff, it was between him and the Manhattan candidate, who was the sanitation commissioner of all people, but a woman, a white woman. And Eric Adams is like, he was a detective captain, but then he was endorsed by the cop unions, even though he's not exactly pro-crime. In fact, there was a black bloc that went through a particularly racist Long Island neighborhood, and him and his police chief went out to basically like, shame these anarchists and on the left, and basically, and to shame the whole party actually for moving too far left.
Oh, jeez.
But he's the future, because he's like Biden's politics, but with the fresh paint and ideology of grind meritocracy. Because Biden's where he is because of just plain old timey corruption, but Democrats that can do the same messaging and the same stability first, but they got where they are because they grinded, they worked hard. They were good merit. They got there by their own merits, and whatever. Which Kamala and Buttigieg also kind of fit, but they're unlikable. But Eric Adams has a kind of, I don't know. He bought something with Bitcoin. Like, he's hip. He's with it. He's with the times. He actually interacts with our mass culture in ways that other Dems, national Dems, don't. Which is kind of
interesting.
It's odd. It's funny. It's weird. It's New York.
Yeah.
It's everything that everyone didn't like De Blasio for. De Blasio wasn't kind of an everyman.
No, definitely not.
He was a kind of elitist progressive kind of guy.
Sure.
So it's not the case. I'm surprised he didn't really do better. I mean, a lot of De Blasio's failures were because Como basically bitch smacked him a bunch of times.
Okay. Yeah.
Or rather, or Como like said, no, you're not doing this, and they fought. They fought and they fought and they fought, and when the mayor and the governor don't get along, the people lose.
Well,
so,
yeah.
And then the mayor gets blamed usually. The governor certainly didn't get blamed. That's why he would be reelected. But because again, he's the governor, so you're supposed to do what he wants or make a deal or whatever. And De Blasio's like, I'm not in the Clinton machine. And that's when he was in the presidential. Do you remember he was actually part of the presidential primary for a short minute?
I barely even remember it. Yeah.
He was in the first kind of super debate where there was two of them.
Was he?
And he was he was sort of just short of being as left as Bernie, but he didn't have the full track record. But he used Bernie's rhetoric.
Okay. So at least has the talking points down, but
yeah, but see, he doesn't walk the walk, so
right.
So everyone's like, "What a piece of shit."
Well, that's dangerous, because that's a big reason that Barack was able to do the things that he did, too, is because he had his finger on the
yeah, I guess
what to say, and governed completely different than what his ideas would suggest.
Well, what's interesting is that it was pointed out by Dan Carlin in a way that if you actually look at Obama's record at the time, it was completely moderate and do nothing. So why would you expect anything different when he's president? And so he was one of the few people who, because of it, he was independent and moderate and whatever, but just independent. that he was able to see clearly or just speak it that no, Obama's a fraud. I don't want to support him, and because you can't believe anything he says because his record is the opposite. His record is safe. He didn't do anything.
Right.
And if he did, it was Biden. It was Biden policy.
Yeah. Well,
Kind of stuff. So it was, but it was only after I voted for him or whatever that like I started having buyer's remorse immediately.
yeah.
The main like there was the executive order stuff, cleaning up the Bush administration kind of thing that made liberals happy. But then when it came to things of substance like card check, which was like in the first 3 months, and he didn't do anything about that, or supporting it or whatever, it just died, and it would have helped unions. And I'm like, well, that
Why
this
not?
is a bad omen, and of course it's like it only went downhill from there. I think I was on the bus. I can remember it was when I listened to a lot of podcasts, including Best of the Left or whatever, and it was an episode about the negotiation of the ACA and just how corrupt it was. And again, you had 2 Democratic senators, one of them from Montana, right, in the pocket of the health insurance, in charge of it. They were in charge of negotiating, and I was watching some of the hearings on the health insurance reform, and just seeing how just bullshit and corrupt it was. And I'm like, and it didn't matter. There was this progressive caucus that my new congressman was in, and they're saying the right things, but like, what are they doing? They're just gonna, I think it was just like, I'm listening to the main coverage, and I'm like, they're just gonna go along with whatever's there. Because that's what I was noticing with the stimulus, the Obama stimulus. They just went along with whatever, like when it was made half tax cuts, they were like, what else are we going to do? We got to vote for this. We're getting half a loaf. Cheer us. And that's when I'm like, well, I don't want to identify with these progressives anymore, or rather, we need something better than this. And, and a year later, I start protesting, and a year after that is Occupy. Or rather, the ACA negotiation was 2010, and so by the next year, you have the Arab Spring, and all of this energy of like, look at how their status quo is being changed. We need to do something similar to that, at least in aesthetics, which is Occupy. But it was also sort of the same. But I think the difference was it was the same in aesthetics, but not in tenor, because I wonder, like, change of history, old history, Occupy demands for the end of the government. Not the end of the government, but the overthrow of the government. We want a new government. A new government,
destruction and
which means a new constitution.
Right. Yeah.
With term limits and all the things that people argue about. But we want to argue about them. So we need a new government first. Everyone says, or not everyone, but it's joked about how we need to vote all the bums out. Well, we don't vote them out. We demand that they leave office. So we have new elections for all offices. Something like that. That would be like the revolutionary demand, and of a general strike, new government, new constitution.
Seems like there'd be a good plot to a graphic novel in that, like some alt history. What if Occupy broke differently?
Yeah. No, the argument is nobody would even come to the encampments if that were the case. We wouldn't have grown.
Oh, okay.
Because we only got critical support from a lot of people because we were so open-ended and we didn't have demands. So the argument from the anarchists was, if we have demands, we're telling people what to be for. And it's also, it's also insidiously liberal in that, like, or like the position of being apolitical. Well, we don't want to be controversial. We don't want to have an opinion that others can disagree with us with. If we have demands, then people will have reasons to not be part of this movement because they too many are reformists. We don't have enough revolutionaries. So let's show people anarchism and how it works so they become more revolutionary. And in that case, it worked with me because the demands of Occupy Wall Street were a Robin Hood tax and some basic Wall Street regulations or something. But at the same time, it was like, well, we know the government's not going to do this, even if we do demand it. So then there's the attitude of like, you can't do, they're not going to. But again, the whole point of the Arab Spring was that you got 1 million people telling the government to resign. And once you had a general strike happening of sorts for a few days, they did. Now in Egypt, it was temporary, but in Tunisia,
in a
it's
lot
still
of places it sounds like it was.
But in Tunisia,
temporary
it's still strong. It's still going strong.
Okay.
Because they didn't have a military government to begin with. In Egypt, they did. So, but yeah, maybe you had liberal parties in Tunisia that already existed. In Egypt, you didn't. So,
All right.
So we need to have our party built to demand, a new government. Because that way, when we do have those new elections, the socialists will do well. We'll have a new constitution with proportional representation, and so even if we just win a quarter of the votes, we'll be like in Czechoslovakia. I watched sorry to keep going off, but the Czech elections, the Pirate Party was like a player, and the only reason they didn't do better, they did the worse, but they were like polling at the beginning of the election season, which of course is 2 months in Europe. But they were like a quarter of the vote. Like, and they made a coalition with mayors, and this is called the Mayor's Party. And is there a mouse behind me or something? Probably. Anyway, I've been hearing scratching.
You hearing stuff? Oh no.
But anyway, they got backstabbed by their coalition partner. And so the Pirate Party didn't do well in the Czech elections. But one of the reasons, but it didn't help that the former president is a billionaire who owns the major media outlet. Sound familiar? But the main attack against the Pirate Party was that their actual prime minister candidate was an Antifa member, like an actual Antifa member. Or not member, but someone who does Antifa actions. So that just shows. But they were a player. They were going to be part of the government. And at the moment, they actually do have one person in government. It was the minister for like the internet, basically. So it's the roundhouse, but it's a consolation prize of getting 5-6%. But they were polling 15% at the beginning. Yeah, or more. So anyway,
so some shenanigans ensued.
Oh, so we haven't finished the podcast episode.
Yeah. Let's get back to the topic of the night.
In certain neighborhoods, which significantly slowed their response times.
And first I'll say you can't use a siren downtown because people are complaining about it. Unfortunately, people look in the vehicle to see who's driving it, and then they complain. So we're going on the call downtown, and you have to blow your horn to tell the car to get out of the way. And they're looking at you like you're crazy.
Rumors were spread that Freedom House paramedics were selling drugs and running dice games from the ambulances, and that thousands of dollars had been stolen from headquarters.
And it became a struggle after struggle after struggle, and eventually, it's almost like a patient struggling to breathe. And eventually the heart gets tired and it stops beating and the person stops breathing. And that's exactly what happened.
In 1975, Flaherty struck a final, devastating blow. He announced that the city would roll out its own brand new paramedic service.
Not only was the new service showered with resources Freedom House had long been denied, its recruits were all white.
The city needed Caroline to serve as its medical director, and she used that leverage to make one demand: that the Freedom House crews be hired on. Flaherty relented. Sort of.
Because the city was required to bring the employees over, but they were not required to keep them. So they found a way to get rid of them. So
always a way out.
that's
Yeah,
how the
They
city
can get
system
ground,
ended up
but
being
it's not gonna have to be.
98% white when the first EMS system in this country was African American.
Within a few years of being replaced by the city's EMS service, Freedom House was more or less forgotten.
Jesus.
In part because, like all good things, paramedics were soon taken for granted. Today, it never occurs to anyone to ask where paramedicine came from.
But to Phil Hallen, that's the true measure of Freedom House's
Because it's
legacy.
Black history.
Paramedicine is just there.
Do you know anybody that doesn't take this for granted at this point in any American city or even in the American countryside? I mean, that nobody would even think of a time when somebody would not survive because that somebody didn't know how to do CPR. It's unthinkable anywhere in the United States.
The model of care created at Freedom House ended up being adopted by countless other paramedics programs across the country, very often with the help of Freedom House veterans. Peter Saffer helped to develop a paramedic program in Baltimore. Mitchell Brown, another Freedom House alum, became the EMS commissioner for the city of Cleveland and later its director of public safety. And Nancy Caroline founded the first ever EMS service in Israel. Her textbook, titled Emergency Care in the Streets, ended up setting the standard in EMS instruction for decades.
As for Moon, he stayed with Pittsburg EMS and retired in 2009 as an assistant chief. How does he feel about it all now, when he looks back on the days when a handful of young men from the Hill made history?
It's something that I'm extremely proud to have been a part of. And every time I see a EMS unit going down the street, I wonder, do they have any idea that's where it all began? Because it all began there.
Kevin and I discussed what lessons the surprisingly recent history of paramedicine might offer people contemplating a different role for police in our public safety infrastructure today. After this.
Probably
Fade
go
out.
Fast forward. There's 15 minutes
Did you
left
know
in
that
it.
there are over 10 million? Then it proactively 99 by trained professionals who
We'll just get through these commercials here and then.
Well, I think we can guess what the dialogue's about. So
Yeah.
supplies are limited. A lot going on in the world, and taking care of yourself is so. 99% Invisible is sponsored by BetterHelp.
And they had these crazy stories that they would tell.
Online therapy at betterhelp.com/invisible. That's betterhelp.com/invisible.
Yeah, we can
maybe
just
that's
take a-
why I stopped.
Okay,
listening
so
to
I'm now
podcasts
talking with Kevin Hazard, who reported that story for us.
in,
And
in our episode ads.
you are a paramedic. I think that's interesting to know.
I mean, we can listen to a couple of minutes of the conversation, I think, maybe, and see if it goes anywhere productive. But otherwise,
Sure.
we got the bulk of it out of the way.
We already know what the alternatives to policing are, really. So.
Sure. Yeah, okay. Yeah, sure. If you want to just leave it there, the podcast. So yeah, as you were,
It was a good
so
story.
rightly enraged by, there's such a huge
yeah.
bit of Black history that's just
But
completely left
is
out
it-
of textbooks.
It's Black history, but like, see, we call it Black history because if it's white history, the story is the first EMS unit was started in Pittsburgh by Mayor Fleschner.
Right.
You know, the visionary, with the help of the man who invented CPR and this enterprising nurse, and the black men would be written out. They just wouldn't be there, and I think this story could. I think there's a lot of other examples of this thing was done, and it was started in the streets by those who needed it, and then it was taken up by authorities,
Taken over.
who then get the credit.
All the credit for it. Yeah.
There's this folk song that's on like the Occupy album, benefit album,
Okay.
of all this collected music, and it's called like, let them. I forget the name of it now, but like it basically the message of the folk song is, let them take the credit. Like we'll let them, like if they make the electric cars, they can have the credit. You know, if we get them to do it. because as far as like liberals or progressives are concerned, like it doesn't matter who gets the credit as long as things are done. You know,
Sure.
that EMS became standard and lives have been saved, including Black lives.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think it
but
does matter who gets the credit
it
because
does.
it shapes
yeah.
public perception.
Yes, it does. Because those men continue to be, I mean, Moon is an exception, right? But as far as Black men in general, the perception is that they're dice playing, pot smoking degenerates. And Moon's one of the good ones because he got to stay on, or he was able to keep claw on, you know, once gotten rid of. But I'm sure there's dozens and dozens of others that weren't,
Right.
Or didn't get the chance to be in EMS later,
Right.
Because of the hiring, because it was now it's city hiring. And
Right.
that means you got to know the right person, which
Exactly.
is most all hiring.
Right.
Um,
Right.
Yeah.
I definitely found that out through my field, urban planning.
Well, how have you? I wanted to ask you, how have you started your landscape business?
Oh, I don't own my own landscape business. Right.
Okay, you work for someone. Okay.
I work for somebody else, and
Okay.
been put in the position to do a whole lot of design work, which I love to do.
Yeah.
And hopefully, going to spin that into a higher position in the coming year.
I wanted to clarify that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the goal eventually, is to own my own, but just the going through the process of capital formation and getting the word out and all of that sort of thing. But I have some I have some ideas that I think nobody's doing right now, and I think they are worthy of putting a business behind it.
Permaculture
stuff,
right?
and also just I look at all the new developments in downtown Minneapolis and St. Paul, and pretty much every new thing that goes up has, if it's residential, that is, has a balcony on every unit, and you hardly ever see anything on it. So that's a huge basically it's a desert that could be turned into something green.
They're not big enough to fit actual like furniture, right? Usually,
sometimes, but some of them are though too, and
but people
see
just don't
the
use
occasional like chairs. Yeah, you might see some like a couple of lawn chairs and a little table or something like that. But there's at least space for an over the railing basket. You could grow some herbs in or something like that, and
as long as it's not too high, then no one's really comfortable in such a balcony.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's true.
God.
But there's plenty of kind of mid-rise ones that are
sure,
less than 10 floors that have been going up lately.
Nothing compares to Manhattan, where you're 40 stories up and you're in this glass.
Yeah. Those
glass
don't get
railing.
built around here quite as much. It does still happen. There's a high rise that's probably about that tall that just went up. And they got balconies, which I assume are mostly going to be unused for that reason. But there's definitely a lot of potential, because once in a while you will see someone who has a little potted plant out there and they're actually doing something, but they're always the exception, not the rule.
I may cover this somehow, but I was reacting to not on stream, but I want to. But it's Strong Towns. There's this site called Strong. Have you heard of Strong Towns?
I've been following Strong Towns for many years. Yeah.
Okay. I think I have a new conclusion of a way of describing them. They're basically urbanism for profit.
Yeah.
Otherwise I would call them like just neoliberals or something, but like it's not quite accurate. But just to say, look, it's urbanism but for profit, because the recent article was kind of put it in stark relief, where it was just an argument of like, we need more urbanists to be landlords. We all need to be landlords. That's the answer.
Yeah.
Why all these developers, they're not following urbanist principles and say, they're letting the balconies not be unfitted. But there's a capitalistic reason for that. It's not because they're not trained in urbanism. It's because the accountant decides what's in the project and what isn't.
Right. You can sell a unit for just maybe 10% more.
If it's a choice,
10% extra cost, and
if it's a choice between making it say more green or having an extra half bathroom, so you can charge $2,000 in rent instead of $1,800 for rent,
Sure.
you're going to put in the extra bathroom.
That's true too. Yeah.
If you're a developer. So we need post-capitalist developers like Perks, which I covered in one of my episodes, which stands for Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, which is a new kind of model being experimented with in the Bay Area, which I'm going to follow and maybe try to replicate, because as much as the land trust is useful, it is not. I don't think it's the answer. It was the 1970s answer for affordability, but I don't think it's our answer.
Okay.
Maybe actual more tenants unions, but what is the goal of a tenants union but to maybe form a permanent cooperative, a real estate cooperative?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, cooperatives, that's about the best we can hope for to stave off the worst effects of capitalism and give people a real say in their own home ownership.
Or demand that, build a movement to pressure your city to, instead of taking that bond out for a parking garage, but for housing, that or to have a housing authority like my city does, to actually be proactive and want to build more housing, which they have done in the last decade, and they are doing the work of renovating current housing stock they have. But at the end of the day, their attitude is kind of maintain what we have and improve what we have. And the waiting list can be 1,000 people or 5,000 people. We're not going to take new bonds out and whatever, or we're not going to be the city's landlord. We're just going to the landlord of last resort, which is the problem. As long as it's for poor people, it's not going to be a mass issue. Public housing, that is.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so is there anything else that's on your mind, or are we kind of wrapping up?
Yeah. I mean, the reason I picked this episode was of course to highlight strategy for defunding police, and that's just start doing it. Really, you see a need, you start doing it, and as it pointed out in the episode, it didn't make that same conclusion, but you got to be careful about City Hall coming and taking an interest, because once they get their hooks in it, they're going to run it the way they want to.
Well, as Minneapolis has kind of shown, this was Cam Gordon's Green, who recently lost to a DSAer there. The plan is, or the message is, not to just defund the police, but to transform the police and revolutionize it. Right. So if you do the alternatives and they're picked up, the police budget may not be cut, but it will be for a number of other services. It will be a diverse set of services. Instead of just being police and fire, you'll also have public EMS. That was the last innovation, right?
And now we're seeing the mental health workers being another part of that too.
Right. So you keep adding more stuff, but that kind of either increases the budget or it actually is taken out of the police. But I think that as long as there's still a law and order approach to mainstream politics, fear of crime, but also not just fear of crime, but it's okay to be afraid of crime. But I mean, we want crime to be down. But as long as we have to solve crime first by locking people up, and then economic activity can occur, because no one will invest / do business where they will be robbed, or what have you, or assaulted, or what have you, or have their car broken in. And it's true. So it's sort of even the best intentioned Democrats have a chicken or the egg problem with that, because they see the problem of solving poverty as economic investment by capitalists, which is not going to happen as long as profits if there's crime, then we can't be profitable. So you kind of the public has to put in the investment on faith that crime will go down, because it's not just faith, there's evidence. But it almost feels like a leap of faith, because when talking to liberals, because they're so ingrained that you can spend all the money you want, you're not going to change You're not going to change people.
Yeah. Yep, which is bogus. Really, I mean,
It is. Yeah, I just want to
every
reiterate,
study.
It's totally bogus. It feels I mean, it feels like it isn't bogus. If all of your negative interactions with the underclass are negative, or panhandlers, or they've scammed you, but then you ignore all the corporate scamming that occurs and all how that's allowed, but because that makes money and they pay taxes, underclass people don't, because it's under the table. You know, crime is under the table. There's no benefit for the city for it to exist. Otherwise, it would be, which is why the golden age of Albany was when all the crime was done by the government. So you didn't have the separation because there weren't as many, marginalized unemployables. Sure. Yeah, the mob was the government. Anyway. Okay.
Interesting stuff.
For more of that, tune into my new Three Lefts part, phase 2.
And I tried to pull up your website, but it's not loading. Is your website down right now?
It's down. It's been down for a month, and I do not know when it will be back up. So if you want to check out my latest 3 episodes, which I have not actually put in podcast form, which I need to put in the work of actually just putting them on YouTube or something. I need to convert them to video. I should be able to actually do that now with my computer. But for goddamn, but it does. It's bad timing that this is the busiest time of my work, of my current job. So it deals with it's state university system. I do phone banking of people who haven't paid, like they've applied to state colleges, and they haven't paid or they need help getting the fee, and the end of the year is when everybody applies. So sort of like a lot of other social services like food stamps and stuff, it's busiest at the end of the year. Obamacare, registration. It's all busiest now, and we're understaffed. Duh. There should be 3 of us. There's not, and yeah. We'll get through it eventually, but we have to. Whatever the point is, what did you just bring up now?
I brought up your podcast on the player FM that I was using. So you can probably still go to your favorite podcast player. I'm assuming because your website's down, that means your RSS feed is down as well. But
it probably does. But you can listen to my show by going to the WCAA. That's the community radio station I do. I help manage it. And there's the archive. So if you go back to like this week's episode, it's Tuesdays at 8 and Saturdays at noon. And so there'll be a version of the show there.
Okay.
The other way of listening to it is what's the
web address for that first one before we?
You go to Grand. It's grandarts.org.
All right, we'll pull that one up.
I don't think there's anything. Yep. So there's the live stream button in the corner there. So if you go to the actual times that my show is playing, you'll hear my show, and you can pause it and whatever. It's not, but there's also the archive.
The river,
that is. Let's see if I can bring up that right now. It's archive.wcaa107.3.org.
Okay. We'll try that one.
Here, I'll put it in the chat.
Oh, okay. Thanks for that.
Do I have access to the chat?
I don't know. If you probably don't actually. Unless you're following also on Twitch or whatever.
Put on private chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Copy link address, and I'll put that right in the chat for everybody.
So basically, whenever any show is put through the auto DJ, it also goes through. The stream is recorded, and then it's broken up into the parts based on time. So the shows are kind of, and so if you go to the times the show is on, which the last one was this Saturday noon. It's not too far down if you let's see, you have it up.
Let me pull it up.
Yeah, I know it's a few more steps and it's not automatic.
Here we go.
So if you scroll down a little bit, there'll be a blue. There.
Three
it is.
left show. There it is. All right.
So
you can
that's
just play it from that, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
And that will be my last episode that I uploaded, which I do, and that's the current way until I get the website back up, because it's not really up to me; it's up to the guy who hosts it, and he's moving, and he has many work emergencies. He does tech support for paying clients, and but he takes the money he makes and he hosts me for free. Along with a lot of it's a price to pay that he has to be busy and on call and whatever. Whenever someone gets hacked,
Sure.
and he told me that there was a problem, and he hasn't gotten back to me, but he is insanely busy. It's unfortunate. It's the first time it's really happened for this long. I think in the past, if it's happened, it's been a week at most.
Okay.
So it's sad, but I didn't do a show this week because of that. Go another week and then spend actually putting the show up and commit to doing that. Because otherwise, the thing that's been distracting was or Hanukkah and and all these job interviews I have.
All right. Well, happy Hanukkah to you, and man, good luck on your job interviews. I hate the interview process. That's one of the worst things to have to go through.
At least some of the offices do socially valuable labor.
That's good.
I was called in again for DMV. So I'm in Albany, where our main industry is state government. But
of course. Mm-hmm.
I'm turning down hate cars, and I actually I have another 5 interviews, so I'm not desperate for the partnership department. But I interviewed for an office that does the plans for prisoners and those coming out of the mental health hospital. That apparently New York only has one, or at least one upstate.
Oh, geez.
And
for the entire upstate of New York, huh?
You cut costs by sterilizing, And
yeah, I got it, but
I know it sucks. It sucks ass.
That means that people.
All of our prisons are also in the North Country, so there's that.
But I mean that's a pretty big hardship on all the families that care about the people that end up getting sent there. They have to go visit them and travel all the way across state. And
very true. Well, I mean, there's many more in the metro area. So maybe the one in Utica is just for upstate, and it's right off the highway. But point is, they're the office that do the plans, and I'd just be their support staff.
For sure. Still seems like important work. So.
Not a bad office.
Yeah, there you go.
As far as what they do, so we'll see.
Well, definitely good luck to you.
Yeah, if I'm hired by none, then I'm back in the part-time grind, and I may make my job more based on rehabbing a house, so that instead of having to earn wages, instead of earning wages to pay for rent or mortgage, I spend the time actually creating housing for myself and others. So after this job is done, I will have enough to buy like a fixer upper, but there's all these other costs there are, of course, all the costs that will still be like baked in, but at least maybe I could grind for some grants, which are still a crapshoot, but whatever. I'm not black.
That's a tough
It's
one.
interesting that in the hood, there are grants for want to own a new home or their first home. Because, they'll probably be the first in their entire family. They may be.
First in
my case, it's not.
Generational line. Yeah.
But, previous generations were able to get houses because of the GI Bill. So, but that's more of a low interest mortgage more than the money was just given away. But that's also what I'd be looking
For
forward,
sure.
looking for. Yeah, no, market may crash soon. Absolutely. So there's two things that work. There's the desire to wait until the housing prices fall again, and I'll get some, and I could just get something for under 100,000, but I still wouldn't have the money. But maybe I could get something from the community land bank, or the community land trust, not the community land trust. I mean the community loan fund. Then there's the window that, regardless of the market, will also crash the interest of New York City developers and investors that are starting to pour money into Albany. More and more, I'm seeing stories of properties being bought by New York City firms. And for the first time, a new house was built in Arbor Hill. This is one of the hoods. There's like a new house has never been built in Arbor Hill since and a new house was actually built, which is that's freaky, because it's just on, like, maybe rehab, of course, rehab the stock that's there. That's the mayor has just done that. That was her to the black poor of Albany. It's like, look, living among you. God, that's anyway. But the window is starting to close because, like, there's this big development that's planned for this major intersection. That's like going to be the signal that Arbor Hill can now be gentrified, because we are a 10-minute walk from the Capitol. But it's one of the case, like Hartford in Massachusetts has the same thing, or that's Connecticut. That's Connecticut has the same thing, where you have a downtown area and then literally you go 5 blocks and it's blight. But it's starting to change. First, it was nonprofits that have been able to rehab and build new buildings. Soon it's going to be actually for-profit developers. And once that happens, there'll be no way for me to invest in it. I'll have to buy a farm in Kasaki. Also known as Coxsackie.
Yeah.
to not New Yorkers. In the same way that you call the Albany.
Albany. Have I been saying Albany? Oh, I apologize.
It's okay. It's just Midwestern versus Yankee,
Yeah.
But we're all supposed to
sure
be the
there's
same
plenty of-
culture. We're supposed to be the same cultural group of Yankee.
That's true.
So,
That's true.
but there's still separation.
I'm sure there's plenty of place names around here that out of towners wouldn't say right. Like there's a suburb called Edina, and it's Edina, and everyone says Edina if they're from out of town. So that's the big tell that you haven't been around.
Well, I'm calling up hundreds and hundreds of people, particularly students. So literally Zoomers, and their names, and how some of them, like you haven't lived Emily, or like you've seen names that seem really standard, but they're spelled in a way that's so alien.
Completely
Why would
different,
it's spelled differently just to annoy, I guess, or just to be different rather than have a
be
different.
unique. Have your own little spelling that you.
I've called like at least 3 named Princess, like they're naming girls Princess, or and other interesting things. But of course, it's the immigrant students that, of course, like I actually do look up how their name is pronounced when it's Nigerian or something like that. But sometimes it's a name that seems intuitive to pronounce it one way, and then they'll correct you saying, no, it's this way.
Yeah.
No, it's Sarah, not Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah.
Something like that. But it's like it literally
exactly
could be
the same way.
It could be
Sarah,
one
but
or the other. And if I put it, how to pronounce this, it will give me one.
yeah, right.
And it'll be a different. So I'm like, well, 50-50.
That's funny.
But yeah. A lot of But Sam is right. A lot of place names are indigenous, and they're either
That's true.
bastardizations through Dutch pronunciation than English pronunciation.
Yep.
Schenectady is a good example, but so are a lot of others.
For sure. Yeah, we have those too, like Wayzata. Everyone says Wayzata, but it is an indigenous origin of the place name. But yeah, anyway,
Okay.
thank you so much for joining me tonight. This is a fun conversation, and yeah, hope to see you again sometime soon, probably in the new year. I'm guessing with how busy you're being, but I look forward to our next time together.
It might be starting to subside, my workload.
Okay,
but maybe it's a false positive. But I was just told December is the busiest month.
Oh, okay,
But just as far as what it drains and makes my hands hurt because I'm on the phone.
Sure.
But I'm gonna ask for a headset tomorrow for sure.
Ooh,
We'll see if I get anywhere with that.
yeah. Good luck with that. All right. Well,
Be
I'll
a
talk to you
real
another
call
time.
center.
Yeah. All right.
Bye.
Serious
Leaving.
business. Have a good night. All right. Well, that was Dan Platt of the Three Left Show podcast. Really great show. Y'all should check out. Unfortunately, it sounds like his website is down now, but we've posted the archives for you so that you can take a look at them. But yeah, man, few people I know of that just have a bigger grasp on so many aspects of politics and theory and stuff. So he's always a treat to have on the stream here. Good night to you as well, Strin. Thanks for hanging out with us. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you all this upcoming Wednesday when we'll be doing chapter 9. Probably doing more than just chapter 9 again, because I think the chapters are getting shorter in What is Communist Anarchism by Alexander Berkman, aka the ABC of Anarchism. So we'll be doing that this Wednesday at 6:00 p.m. Central Standard Time. So stay tuned for that. If you like what you're seeing, there's always a way to help out the show by sharing it or by donating. I do have a new donate link now that I've started using Stream Elements. Let me just find that link right now. So there you go. If you're interested in, supporting me more monetarily, more directly, there's a good link to do that. That connects right to my PayPal. So if you like what you see, you can do that. And you can always, of course, subscribe on Twitch, and that helps me out. Otherwise, just, share it with anyone you think might be interested in some different strategies of reallocating funding from police and getting a more just and equitable system of policing, if such a thing is even possible, but at least working towards that, working towards saving more lives, really, of people that now are victimized by police. So all this stuff coming out, this trend of sending mental health care workers is definitely positive movement in that direction. Will save a lot of people's lives simply through the fact of having less people interacting with police. Yeah, ACAB for sure. Yeah, man. Yeah, that's all I have for you tonight. I'm going to go ahead and raid into somebody now on Twitch. So for those of you joining me on Twitch, if you have anyone that you would like to nominate for tonight's raid, now's the time to shout it out. Otherwise, I'll just pick someone who I think is of interest, and we'll raid into them. I see Bread Crochets is on. That's always a good choice. Joe Lewis, another great one. Oh, Loner Box is on. A little bit larger audience, but definitely cool. He did a really great video recently on Lauren Southern and her scam, where she was basically harassing migrant ships in the Mediterranean. Ships that were trying to save people from drowning, literally, and she was somehow trying to harass them. Oh, you're going to Bread? Well, why don't we just raid into Bread Crochets then? Save you the effort. Bread Crochet is always a really fun stream to listen to. He does a lot of the same sort of things I do, that he will listen to theory audiobooks and then, kind of comment him. And then at the same time, he's making really cool stuff. These really cool crochet creations. So it looks like tonight he's doing Antifa, autism, and the border wall around punk. Very cool. So let's do bread crochets tonight. For those of you not on stream, here's the link to follow bread crochets. Always cool. Oh, he brought you to me. That is very cool. I've definitely enjoyed having you in chat these last few months here, Strin, whenever you can make it. So yeah, if you're looking for new Twitch content to branch out onto, maybe that's not your platform of choice, or you're just getting new to it, or you just want to find one more cool person, here's definitely one to go check out, and that's Bread Crochets. So very shortly we will start the raid. So I will say goodnight to you all. Thank you for joining me for this. I thought this was a really interesting episode. We had some good discussion going, and you can look forward to more of it in the future. Actually, the reason that I chose this particular topic was because I put up a poll in my Facebook group, Left Signal Boost, which please definitely join that as well if you if you have any presence on Facebook. We've carved out of ourselves a very welcoming and educational and fun place, I should say, that goes against most of what you see on Facebook. But if you can brave those waters and get onto Facebook, Left Signal Boost is the place to go. And the reason this week's topic was chosen was because of a poll I did there. And in future weeks, I'll probably do the same thing. And then also, the Discord is another great place to check out or to make suggestions of stuff that we look at. I'll put that caption up right now for the Discord. Let's see, new Discord. So there you go. You just got to follow that link, and you can join the Discord, keep the conversation going. Yeah, I totally get it, Strin. I would have deleted my Facebook if not for some really cool groups that I've found and been able to meet cool people through. That's pretty much the only thing keeping me there, because otherwise it's just a cesspool of boomer memes, and Ben Shapiro is the dominant force there. And that's really all you need to know, is he's the dominant political figure on Facebook. But we're trying to change that. We're trying to help people branch out and actually think about some good ideas for once. Anyway, let's start the raid into bread crochets. Thanks again for joining me. See y'all next time.